with, you have to understand where these people are, what the environment there are, and what they're engaging with. That there's a good chance if you only do it a couple times here and there, and without any level of consistency, then okay, you're not being annoying to people. You're not even running close to that risking being annoying. You're running more of a risk of not people going back to what we were saying before of not knowing about you.
You're just kind of swept up into everything else that's going on and hoping that somebody takes notice of you. Like it is strategic. It takes more than that.
Right.
I would say one way to mitigate the noise would be to limit your Twitter following specifically to us and our guests.
Yeah.
It's a good way to get ahead of it.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, we talked about some ways to kind of like mitigate like these feelings and stuff. But what are some other ones? Like, because like, what are ways that people can kind of easily, or I shouldn't say easy because everybody's different, and sometimes this can be a real challenge. But what are other ways people can overcome these feelings, do you think?
Right. I mean, well, one thing kind of up front is that if you feel like you are, if you feel like you're hassling people, if you feel like there's something that you're doing that is getting on people's nerves or annoying them or whatever the case, I think it's kind of your responsibility at that point to really hone in on incentivizing their engagement with you to begin with. So like what is, really kind of consider what's the reason why someone would want to play your game or want to interact with you on social media in the context of your game, and really leaning into that, whether it be, talking about if the game's a passion project and you think that passion is palpable, talk about it, talk about the process. If it's the mechanics themselves you feel are accessible or maybe build on something that people are already very much into, then discuss that. That's important too. Like every game is going to have a different thing that it should focus on, in your outreach and your marketing. That's a fundamental right there. But really kind of steering into the skid rather than trying to create the audience and then direct them to those things, leverage those things because they are what's going to net you your audience in the end.
And I think what you just described there too kind of sums it up nicely by saying, just identify what your intent is for making the game in the first place, right? Because I think once you identify your intent behind the project, right, everybody has their own reason. But regardless of what it is, whether it's a hobby project or your side business or however you're treating it, I think that's going to help come out with everything that you just said and talking about it too. Like the more you talk about it, the more you're going to learn about how people are interacting it, and you might find different ways like oh, I never realized that I could talk about the game in this fashion, which is actually a lot more people are interested when I talk about this way compared to how else. And it could be anything from mechanics or just design or whatever it may be. But the more conversations you're having, and that's why we always talk about, in other episodes, testing out stuff. Like if you're doing an ad or you're doing a Twitter post or something, that's a form of testing. But another great one is just talking to people as well, or just starting those conversations. And it doesn't have to be at a large volume, but really having those conversations. And then that way it helps you clearly identify what your intent is. And because sometimes we might not know what our intent is when we're making games, right? Sometimes we kind of rely on others to kind of help formulate that and kind of mold it and really understand what that is, because we have our own ideas, but sometimes it's hard to capture what we're really trying to say and what we are saying. And those are all great things that can happen to really narrow down and identify that intent. Another one too, and I'm not going to go too much into this because we talk about it a lot in other episodes and such, but it's like really knowing what your audience wants, or really knowing a lot about your audience. But like, again, the reason why I mention this is because if you really understand and know what they want, you do the work to find out who you're really catering to, who you're targeting to, who's in line with your vision, and obviously if that vision aligns with them, then it goes back and it really diffuses the things we were talking about earlier. Like if you are afraid of nobody caring, well, if you know what they want, you know that they're gonna care because you understand what they want, right? And I mean, I know it sounds so basic in concept, but like all of us get into this trap sometimes and thinking, like we play the what if game, like, oh, what if nobody cares about this, and we kind of let our inner demon, so to speak, get the best of us. But if you do those things, like getting to really understand and knowing your audience, then those fears essentially kind of go away, because you have the information and data and knowledge to really know that, like, I know that people care because I have proof here and everything. And even if it's just from like audience research, boom, you have proof.
Right. Well, I think that's where people really have to differentiate, because it is not your responsibility to just make a certain amount of people interested in your game. Your responsibility is to determine what appeal your game has, because the audience for that already exists, and track those people down. You know, they're already out there. You're not creating them, you're finding them, you know? And so for that reason, like, I think it allows you to be a little bit more focused, which, as we've discussed at length in many episodes, the more focused you can be, especially for indie games where, you know, you're in a niche and competing with a very, very wide array of competing games, you know. So really just kind of having that awareness that you're seeking out an audience that's already interested in the concepts and things that play within your game. You know, that streamlines a lot of the kind of more emotionally influenced aspects of the process.
Now, earlier you were talking about like creating that experience and everything else in terms of like really how to serve your audience, and that was one of a few others you listed. But in light of that, because the other side of things that I'm looking at too is, okay, as devs, you're making a game, but you don't necessarily always have things open for people to play with and everything else, right? Mm-hmm. So while that's happening, what are ways that devs can provide value to others, especially when their game is not available, it's currently in development?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, there are a number of ways to do that, and most of them revolve around developing a community around the game. Mm-hmm. And I know, you know, we've had them on here a few times, but I think Kit Fox does an excellent job of this through their social media presence primarily. Be it like their use of the email lists for Boyfriend Dungeon, they're doing like different emails. I believe it's either it's like monthly, I think, and it's from the perspective of the weapons in the game, you know, allowing users to engage in content that's going to be in the game, even if they can't access it in that already tangible playable capacity, like when it would fully come out. Other people we've had, Jenny from Rose City mentioned the Discord, you know, things that are in progress, you know, building that community, allowing them to have kind of a playground to celebrate what's impending, and then also like already providing them something they can get out of being invested in the game, even if it's just talking to some new people. You know, and then you get into some of the more technical stuff, you know, alphas, betas, right. Early testing, events, stuff like that.
Yeah, so it's those things too. And I'll even take it a step further and really diving in a little bit more on like that marketing front, where we're not just it doesn't necessarily mean just players or people that you want in your community too, but it also comes down to you know, how are you providing value to others in terms of like, let's say, whether it's be prospective fans or other devs or even the media. And I think a good way of really understanding that and how you're providing value is also being extremely clear with your intentions and making it simple for all these groups of people to act. Because each group that I just listed, like, you should have your own objective and potential strategy when approaching those individuals. So Mustapha already listed a bunch for like prospective fans, building the community and stuff. But when it comes to other devs, I mean, you guys, I'm sure, are already reaching out to each other and getting other valuable insight and information and stuff. But like, what else are you doing to really be making sure that you're clear with your intentions when you talk to other devs? But also, like, what are you doing too when you're speaking with them, making it clear for them to act? Are you asking them for advice? What are you doing to follow up with that advice? Are you helping out in some other way? And just being clear with your intentions and what you want the others to do is really going to say, it can speak volumes to about you as a developer and create respect and authority. And it might not be a lot of things people are thinking about, but look at the long range. I mean, look at the types of people that we see on GDC talks and other events and stuff. I mean, I think it would be fair to say that a lot of those individuals are where they get there because of having that understanding and mindset and being clear with those intentions and stuff. And let's take it to the media too. A lot of times we view the media as they're doing us, game devs as favors because they're covering and getting the word out there and stuff. But and I know we talked about this a little bit too in other episodes. I feel like we're saying that a lot, but it's a good refresher. But like, what
we're building up an archive? We may as well have valuable
exactly
points we can go back to at this point.
Right. But like, what are you doing to provide value to those people too? And in a lot of ways, what we've talked about before is what that does with your game is one, right? But also, like, are you making it easier for them to ask questions? Are you putting together a statement where people can already, have questions formulated, so their job is just that much easier, right? So again, I think everything that we talked about before and providing that value and everything else is just coming back to being just clear with your intentions, and making it easy for people to act, regardless if it's fans, other devs, or media, and really understanding that.
And if you're curious at all about like the efficacy of what's being described here, like you're actively listening to it at play right now because it's the very philosophy we apply to coming up with the subject matter that we discuss, as well as our outreach to guests and things like that. Like, yes, of course, we want them to provide value to you, but we also want to provide value to them, make it as universally beneficial as possible. So it's clearly applicable. It works. I mean, you guys have heard we've had some excellent guests on here, applying that kind of philosophy.
Exactly. And another one to kind of take this a little bit further, too, just real quick, though, is create content worth sharing. And I know I've shared this before, probably this statement before, and it can definitely be a tough one for people to really, take and determine, okay, what is worth sharing. But you know what? The best way I look at it is start with any type of media, just anything that you have, whether it's a soundtrack, concept art, early stages of your game. You have a new start menu. Good, share that, right? We've heard countless times and stuff, but then especially at the early stages, or like anything that like, that's not polished enough. Well, your game's never going to be polished like 100% completely what you would like. We all face that, but share it, and in time, what you do is you'll figure out of the stuff that you're sharing really stands out the most, and then what you can do is leverage that in different ways. And then you start, and when you have enough of it, then you can be very selective in what you're sharing, knowing that, hey, whenever I put this out there, a lot of people are really going to like it. And, it's a process to get to that point, but that's ultimately what you're doing. So when you create something worth sharing, start, and maybe some of this stuff might be not the most ideal. And that's kind of what I was saying before. It might not be the most ideal, but start somewhere and then know the stuff that you really want to, that is really worth sharing, because that's going to have the biggest impact on doing everything we talked about in terms of reaching out to those audiences, especially when it's the community that you're looking to build. All right, so before we wrap things up here, I kind of wanted to like close with this one last question, Mustapha, and see and get your take on this. But like, what do you think is one of the best ways to truly overcome, this feeling of like, okay, I might not necessarily be serving my audience the best? And I know it's a tough one.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing that I like to employ fairly universally, business, personal, or otherwise, if you have that type of question, I'd say it's worth confronting the source. I mean, don't tell your audience, I don't feel like I'm doing enough for you guys, but like ask them questions like,